My name is Robert D. Skeels. I'm a Juris Doctor candidate at PCL. My research specialty is education policy and the law. And there must have been a miscommunication. I was told today that I was supposed to come and give a brief talk on Ref. Rodriguez. And so I'm going to just shorten the talk that I was originally given, okay, because now I was told that that was not appropriate. I was hoping that there'd be a podium because I'm a little uncomfortable holding a microphone, but I'm sure most of you have heard about Ref. Rodriguez in the news. He's been kind of a hot topic lately. There's a lot of hot takes in the Los Angeles Times and other media outlets. A lot of the stuff that's coming out now about Mr. Rodriguez was stuff that we researched in 2014 and 2015. So I just wanted to speak real briefly. I'd like to just give you a real quick background on him, and then we'll talk about all of the kind of improprieties that were going around right when he got elected, and kind of what the status is now, like what are the outcomes that we expect to see as a result of this. Mr. Rodriguez is as he proudly says, he's a child of immigrants, which is a wonderful thing. Went to Catholic schools, never attended public schools. Then he went on to a private university. He attended LMU. After he graduated from LMU, he went to work for the Catholic school system, which is great. You know, we like Catholic schools, but certainly it doesn't give you much experience with public schools, right? While he was doing that, he was attending a graduate institute. He met a woman named Jacqueline Elliott, and they decided this is right when Reed Hastings brought charter schools to California, right after the '92 charter school law. He decided with Elliott that that would be a good opportunity. Now, you know, a lot of times when we hear them frame these things, they frame them in terms of opportunities for children, but generally, they're opportunities for business. That's what charter schools are. And so they opened a charter chain called Partners for Uplifting Communities. It's usually acronized as PUC. And while he was doing that, he finished his graduate degree, and he was one of the earliest members of the California Charter Schools Association. And I don't know if people are familiar with the founding of the CCSA, but the founder of the California Charter Schools Association is Steve Poizner. He ran for governor a couple of years back. And Steve Poizner is this rabid, racist, nativist, anti-immigrant. Like he was like doing the Trump thing before Trump did it. You know, he was doing the we need to build a border wall. We need to, I mean, the language he uses is that really excessive, like Minuteman, Klansman type language. This is the individual that founded the CCSA, the California Charter Schools Association. I think people really need to bear that in mind, that this is the kind of mindset. Him and Caprice Young and Reed Hastings and a number of other individuals, one of their earliest members was Ref. Rodriguez. He was a board member for a very, very long time on the CCSA. Real power player, you know, close friends with Carrie Walton Penner. And Carrie Walton Penner is a longtime board member, as is her deceased father from the Walton Foundation on the CCSA. He still holds a seat in memoriam, by the way, even though he's been dead now for some 10 years. She's, you know, one of the most virulent privatizers in the country, close friends with Ref. Rodriguez. So just to kind of give you an idea of his pedigree, his background, and where he comes from. So he decides to run for the school board election, and we have the gentleman that was our school board member, who was a wonderful school board member, and he was doing something that the charter schools hate. He started advocating for the rights of students with disabilities. You see, and that's something you can't talk about in the charter school industry, because that cuts into revenue streams, that cuts into executive salaries, and that cuts into opportunities for their unelected boards to ink no-bid contracts with, you know, tech bros and other people that make a lot of money. And so, you know, so when the charter school industry, when the needs of children interfere with the needs of revenue generation and with profitable business ventures, the children always lose out. There's no elected board to check that or have any kind of oversight or control over that. So while he was running, me and a group of activists, and you know, it's a group of people that there's some retired teachers, there's a couple of parents, there's myself and a couple other people, and we all do research together. We kind of pool our resources and we research together. And we started really looking into this Rodriguez individual, like what other things did he have going on? And we began turning up a treasure trove of information, right? And so here are some of the things that were going on. Now, you're seeing it in the news now, which is really, it's great. I'm glad KPCC and some of these other outlets are starting. But this information was available to them 2.5 years ago, and they didn't do anything with it. So that's really disconcerting, and it really speaks to like how neoliberalism and corporate control of all the aspects of our society are all pervasive. And how even the media, which is supposed to be a watchdog in a democracy, is no effect. It doesn't help us, right? That's what it speaks to. So one of the things, and you probably saw this in the news, is that one of his executives was running a side business of a food company called Better For You Foods. That's the one thing that they were being investigated on, right? Now, you know, I'm taking corporate law right now, and when you're on a board of directors or when you're an executive for any kind of corporation, you know, there's this concept known as self-dealing, right? Which means that you can't sell stuff to yourself. Like it's a conflict of interest and it's inappropriate. This is what she was doing. It was in the LA Times. He was actually part of that business. What they didn't talk about is at the same time that Better For You Foods was going on, he had opened another business called Better For You Fundraising, right? It was registered at the same address. It was registered under his name, and his client list included Puck schools. In other words, he was selling his own products and services to his charter schools. Now, generally, like if you're a board member, that's inappropriate in and of itself. It's self-dealing, conflict of interest. He wasn't just a board member on his charter schools. He was an officer. He was the treasurer of Puck schools. So he had a fiduciary duty to his charter schools, and here he is selling side business things to his own charter school. Now, if this was some kind of like big private enterprise like Raytheon or something, and they were doing this, I wouldn't really care much because it would only be their shareholders that are getting burned. But remember, with charter schools, where does the money come from?
Taxpayers.
It comes from us. So here's a guy with fiduciary duty to us. He's got our money. He's supposed to, we're giving this money with the idea that it's being used to educate children, and instead he's found wonderfully creative ways to shunt that money into his own bank account. You know, this is stuff that was all available when the news, you know, was running the stories and they didn't touch it. Another thing that was going on, and I'm going to try to make this really brief because I didn't realize that we had kind of a limit on the time, is that he... no
one else is on the agenda.
Oh, okay. All right.
Keep going.
Okay. He opened, in conjunction with some of the larger foundations, the Walton Family Foundation, the Gates Family Foundation, opened another nonprofit called Partners for Developing Futures. And it had a multi-million-dollar budget. And we started looking into it, and we realized that even though there had been all this money funded, and even though there was like, you know, he was one of the officers, Angela Bass was the vice president. I don't know if any of you remember Angela Bass, but she was a high-ranking executive with the Partnership for Los Angeles Schools, which was one of Villaraigosa's side businesses as well, right? But she was a high-ranking executive, so she's in on this. And so we decided that we need more information. The Secretary of State couldn't provide anything. The Attorney General had written them 3 letters saying, look, you've made no financial filings for several years now. We're going to shut you down if you don't make a financial filing. Okay. I went to their office. Never existed. You know, it was a Puck office. It was Partnership for, you know, I had an interesting conversation with the young woman there. But it kind of goes to the idea that they're able... People sometimes think about nonprofits, they think about like charities to help kittens or to save poor children or something. And by all means, there are charities and 501c3s like that, right? They don't think about like other 501c3s and 501c4s like the Heritage Foundation or the American Enterprise Institute, or, you know, those are also nonprofits, so to speak, right? And so what we don't realize is the vast majority of nonprofits really aren't doing good things or charitable things. That's the real truth, you know. One of my favorite books is called The Revolution Will Not Be Funded Beyond the Nonprofit Industrial Complex. It's written by a collective of radical women, and it's certainly a book I recommend to everybody here to read to give you an idea. So the more we started digging with this Partners for Developing Futures, this PDF thing, the more we realized that they'd gotten millions of dollars, tax sheltered, mind you, because the Walton Foundation and the Gates Foundation were able to write that off. It's a charitable donation, so to speak. And the money was never accounted for. It all disappeared, you know. And so I filed what's known as a Form 13909 with the Internal Revenue Service. It's a form you file when nonprofits are unwilling to divulge information that they're required by law to divulge. And this is something else you might not know. You can go to any nonprofit. You go to their principal place of business during regular business hours, and you can demand to inspect their Forms 990, which are their tax returns, and their 1034, which is their founding documents. And you can do that, huh? That applies to anybody. Anybody can walk. Oh, would a union? Are unions? Is UTLA a 501c3?
No.
Then I'm talking about 501c3s. I'm talking about 501c under the tax code. You're able to walk in and do it during regular business hours. So this is what we did, and they weren't there, and we filed that, and that actually began the process of them losing their tax-exempt status. So I take pride in the fact that Rep. Rodriquez lost his tax-exempt status because of a form that we filled out. And shortly afterwards, the Attorney General also shut them down. But the problem is, nobody knows what happened to these millions of dollars. It was close to $3 million. It wasn't total. It wasn't $3 million total, but in aggregate, it was close to $3 million. That money's gone, you know? Now, this wouldn't be a big deal because we were digging this up in June before the election, and you know, this was kind of, the problem was that same year, supposedly after they had dissolved and shut their doors, they inked a $30,000 contract with the LAUSD 2 or 3 days before Rodriquez declared his candidacy. You know? And now that's, I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I find that kind of disconcerting, you know? We've never been able to account for that $30,000 as well. We have a copy of the contract with the district. Luckily now, see, we went to places like the LA Times, we went to KPCC, we even went to Jamie Alter Linton's LA School Report, and we handed them all that we said, here's all the links, here's all the documentation. If you want a smoking hot red story, here's all you need, and none of them would touch it. And I think, again, it goes to show like the kind of power that the forces behind the privatization of alcohol, public education, of Alcoholics Anonymous, exactly. See, you know where I'm used to speaking, of public education, like how much sway they actually do have.
Yes.
So today, and I just wanted to mention the Lakeview charter audit, which was one of his charter schools, Puck Charter School. They were in the red for over 9 years, and no one knew about it until they were finally audited by the state. And that in itself isn't as big a deal as the fact that they weren't complying with any of the regulations to protect children. And one of the things they weren't complying with is they weren't holding meetings for reporting and preventing child abuse. And I think that that's something that, you know, when we talk about non-compliance and we talk about waivers from the Ed Code, and the press always talks about waivers from the Ed Code as if that's a good thing. Like charter schools, they're granted autonomy from the Ed Code, but the Ed Code serves to protect the community. Right. The Ed Code serves to protect students and families and employees of the schools, and by saying that we're just going to eliminate that, that's highly problematic. That's highly disconcerting. So just to put that out there. Right around the same time, I talked about the $30,000, right, that went missing. That's district money that went straight into his pocket, never went accounted for.
Very close to 26,000.
Well, it's very close to hauntingly close to 26,000. We're gonna
Same period of time.
Same period of time, and that's what we're gonna get to next. While the election was going on, we were looking at his 440 filings, and we're saying, you know, this is really unusual that it's right before Christmas, and employees that are making minimum wage are making the maximum donation to his campaign. It's just something didn't seem right. Now, Rodriquez explained it away by saying, look, I'm so well loved by my employees and by my relatives, everything, that they're willing to make that degree of sacrifice. Now, that may or may not be true, but the problem is would they been willing to make that kind of sacrifice? The problem was that all of them at the same time were willing to make the exact same sacrifice. That kind of was a red flag to a lot of us, you know. And again, we kind of brought it up. I was in contact with the Office Inspector General at the time. I was feeding them all this information. We were sending to the press. In fairness to KPCC, they did report on it, okay? But they're a small outlet, right? They're a public radio station. They don't really have the footprint or the platform that, say, an LA Times or, you know, a Daily News has. Those bigger platforms wouldn't touch it, right?
Supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates.
Who was it reported?
Supported by Bill and Melinda
Absolutely,
Gates. Yeah.
absolutely supported by the Gates Foundation. So we have, you know, the outcome of the election, of course, and there's a lot more to this, but I don't want to make the talk too long, is that this individual does get elected at the expense of probably one of the best school board members that we've had in recent memory, right? You've got an individual that's really kind of like the poster child of the California Charter Schools Association. Close friends with one of the key family members of the Walton Foundation, you know. He's got all the connections in the world, and it actually opened the door for all the subsequent victories that the California Charter School Association has been enjoying. And a lot of us kind of knew that this was inevitable, right? That the teachers union was kind of like the last bastion between like the public education system and just full corporatization, because that was the only people that had any resources, but they didn't have unlimited resources. The Bradleys and the Gateses and the Broads and the Kochs, they have unlimited resources, you know, and so they were not going to give up on a few losses. They were going to continue their project, and it's been winning. But I think Rodriquez kind of opened the door for that. You know, he kind of made the he gave the CCSA the confidence that they needed to continue with their string of victories. So we get to today. And you have him facing, now this is a direct fallout of those donations that those campaign contributions that I spoke to. He's facing 3 felony counts: conspiracy and perjury and offering a false instrument, all of which are, you know, in law we call them crimes involving moral turpitude. In other words, these are crimes that if you're convicted, you can never become an attorney. You can't get a security clearance. If anybody in here does immigration law, you know that that's one of the things that almost always will get you an order to be deported, because it's really hard to fight. We call them CIMTs in law. It's really hard to fight a CIMIT. But you've got the charter school industry saying, look, this guy's done really nothing wrong. These are just minor violations, and you know he shouldn't be taken off the school board. You know, I beg to differ. I think that you know you're in charge of a multi-billion-dollar budget, right? We've seen a pattern of malfeasance and misconduct in this individual. You know what he's done. Like we've seen him opening side businesses and self-dealing. You know there should be real concern and uproar that this individual has access not just to the funds, but to what's important in the district and what's not. I would posit that he should step down, but that's of course not up to me, you know.
Stonewalled it for 2 years.
Absolutely, it did a wonderful job stonewalling it, you know. And it's actually kind of interesting that given the forces at work, it's actually interesting that the prosecutor had the courage to take this case on, because honestly, there's going to be a great deal of political pressure. I can almost guarantee you that the felony charges will probably be dropped somewhere early in this process, and that's, you know, and they'll plea bargain. He'll cop to some of the misdemeanor charges, and you know, and that's why political pressure from the outside is absolutely imperative. Because, you know, the legal system, every once in a while the law benefits working people like us, every once in a while. But generally the system was set up to protect ruling class interests, right? And that's generally what it ends up protecting. You know? And I'm saying that as a person that's trying to become a lawyer, you know, and I'm upfront about it. That's basically what law is all about, is protecting ruling class interests. So, you know, this all really comes down to a lack of oversight, accountability, and transparency, which is kind of the hallmarks of the charter school industry. You know, it's kind of like that's its bread and butter. And I, you know, now that we're kind of at the end, and I want to leave a second or two for people that have questions, but I kind of want to sum up by saying something that I feel really gets to the heart of the matter. You know, if any one of us wanted to run to be on the board of directors of PUC, Charter School Corporation, right? Or we wanted to run for Green Dot or Alliance or any of the other large charter chains that, you know, purportedly educate children in the city, you can't do it. 501c3s are not compelled to have public elections. As a matter of fact, most of them just self-appoint. You know, you have your promoters of the corporation, they file with the Secretary of State, and then they just pick their friends. You know, that's why you look at most charter boards, and they're comprised of business bankers, hedge fund managers, Hollywood lawyers, and stuff like that. Rarely, if ever, will you see a charter school chain with any kind of educators or people familiar with pedagogy on their board, which is that's telling in and of itself, you know. But we can't run for their board, but somehow their people are allowed to run for our board, you know. And I think that sums up neatly what the charter school privatization project's all about, is that it's complete corporate control over what used to be the public commons, and it's eliminated any kind of voice, any kind of agency of working class people and families that actually send to school. And I appreciate you giving me the time to discuss.